Good morning, everybody. Nick beat me to the opportunity to get to say Merry Christmas to you this morning. We realize it's not yet Thanksgiving, and yes, we know Halloween was 3 days ago, but here we are. And if you have any complaints, I would love to hear them. You can email me at julian@allchurch.com, and that would be great. Send those my way, and I'll be sure to see them. All jokes aside, my name's Brad. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm grateful that you guys have chosen to worship with us here at All Church this morning. If you have a copy of the scriptures, please turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 5. We're going to start in verse 8. We're working our way through this series in Ecclesiastes, and as you turn there, I want you to think about this question. What do you live for? What do you live for? Because Ecclesiastes is calling us to consider the meaning of life. And I think when we ask the question of, what's the meaning of life? It can feel somewhat esoteric, it can feel abstract, too philosophical, like we can't tangibly grasp it. But if I ask you the question, what do you live for? You will begin to see what you believe functionally the meaning of life is. And then, as that comes to mind, whatever it might be, I want you to ask yourself this question. Can it bear the burden of the meaning of your existence? Whatever it is that you're living for, can it bear that kind of weight? Can you take it with you beyond the grave? One commentator on the book of Ecclesiastes says this. He says, Ecclesiastes teaches us to live life backward. It encourages us to take the one thing that is certain, our death, and work backward from that point into all the details and decisions and heartaches of our lives, and to think about them from the perspective of the end. It is the destination that makes sense of the journey. If we know for sure where we are heading, then we can know for sure what we need to do before we get there. Ecclesiastes invites us to let the end sculpt our priorities and goals, our greatest ambitions and our strongest desires. And for a culture that emphasizes living in the now, who don't like to think about our death, this can seem morbid and strange. But death is a teacher. It is a sober filter through which all things that won't last will be pushed away to the side. And here's the irony. Death helps us make sense of life. Let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 5, starting in verse 8. We're going to read through the end of chapter 6. God's word says, if you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter. For the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But this is gain for a land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. There is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and anger. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a grievous evil. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things and he has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For it comes in vanity and goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to the one place? All the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage has the wise man over the fool? And what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. Whatever has come to be has already been named, and it is known what man is, and that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. The more words, the more vanity. And what is the advantage to man? For who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? So we're coming off of the heels of the opening section of chapter 5, where the author of Ecclesiastes has presented to us that a heart of worship is a heart that fears God. And in this next section of chapter 5, going into 6, the author of Ecclesiastes turns us back out into the fallen world in which we live and says, even as we live with a heart that's in fear of God, we live in a fallen reality where we will see suffering and where we will be tempted to pursue vain ends. Specifically here, the vanity of acquiring wealth, material things, honor, and success. Chapter 5, verses 8 and 9 say, if you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and righteousness, do not be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But this is gain for a land in every way, a king committed to cultivated fields. And in this section of the scriptures, we see the downward oppression of greed. Because a man in power who is not living in fear of God, the king in power who's not living in fear of God, will seek his own well-being at the expense of those beneath him. Oppression is the seeking of greater gain for oneself at the expense and hurt of those underneath of them, showing no regard for their well-being and their care. And the author of Ecclesiastes says that we ought not be amazed when we see this downward oppression. Why? Well, he's not saying be calloused. He's saying don't be amazed when you see this, because this is the fallen reality in which we live. At creation in the garden, God made man in his image so that we could glorify him, seek the well-being of our neighbor, and prosper and cultivate the earth into something beautiful alongside of him. But at the fall, man's heart turned inward. What this means is that we now by nature, in our fallen nature, tend to seek our own well-being over and above those around us and especially beneath us. Our fallen nature doesn't demand that everything we do is evil. We're still made in the image of God. We can do good things. But our tendency as fallen man and woman is to seek our own gain, our own well-being first, rather than to seek our good in the glory of God and the good of another. And so the author of Ecclesiastes here is saying, do not be surprised when you see oppression, because the fallen reality, the heart of the one who does not fear God, will seek their own well-being as their priority over and above the needs and well-being of those beneath them. However, he says, what is gain for a land in every way? A king who is committed to cultivated fields. In ancient Israel, a properly cultivated field was not only a blessing to the king and to the harvesters as they shared in the crop, but it was a blessing to the widows, the least in society, and the poor. Because in Leviticus 19, God commanded his people to not harvest everything in the field. He said to leave the corners and the edges unharvested so that the king and the harvesters could have what they need. But then after the harvesters come through, the lowest in society could come into the field and take the food that they need. And so a king who is committed to cultivated fields is a king who is not pursuing greater gain for oneself at the expense of those beneath them, but is a king who is fighting back against greed by taking less for himself so that those who are the least in society can have what they need. So, are we willing to get less so that others might get what they need? Or is our greed and our love for money make us slow to give and quick to get? Does your pursuit of wealth, success, honor, material things crush others in your life? Now, greed is an interesting thing because I think we can all see that, myself included, and hear those questions and think, man, Brad, I might not be as generous as I could be, but I don't think I struggle with greed. And I think that's because in our society, we're able to point to other people who are more affluent than us and justify our way of living as modest compared to theirs. Well, I don't live like them. Tim Keller makes an apt observation of our culture when he says, Jesus warns people far more often about greed than about sex. Yet almost no one thinks they are guilty of it. Therefore, we should begin with a working hypothesis that this could easily be a problem for me. If greed hides itself so deeply, no one should be confident that it is not a problem for them. So can we all this morning start with the assumption that greed could actually be a problem for each and every one of us, especially in our materialistic modern society that always tells you to go and get the new thing? Could greed really be a problem for us? It might be hard to see that in this downward oppression of greed as we sit back and say, well, Brad, nobody's hurt in the way that I acquire wealth for myself. But the author of Ecclesiastes also warns us of the inward delusion of our greed. The preacher here shows us that the delusion of the greedy man will be in his discontentment. Look at verse 10. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor with his income. Do you see the ironic tragedy of this reality? A heart that loves money is actually pursuing the accumulation of money. And so, although a heart that is set on money is seeking contentment in the acquiring of goods, your heart is actually set on that which you don't have, and so you will never be content. Because a heart that loves money is set on what it doesn't have rather than being grateful for what we do have. Verse 12, the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. And I think we're able to hide our love for money at times by saying that we are being good stewards of what God has given us. I'm trying to be financially wise and plan for the future. Great. There's goodness in that. But verse 12 tells us that the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. How much of your life is marked by anxiety about the money that you don't have, that you think you need right now? How much sleep do you lose over the money that you want rather than thinking about the money that you do have? And I think we justify, again, this anxiety by grounding our greed in financial stewardship and providing for our family. Well, I know I'm going to need more, but when will it be enough? Again, pointing to verse 12, we can read in full. It says, sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. The sweet sleep of the laborer is not determined by how much he or she brings in, but by his heart's disposition towards that which he brings in. Whereas the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. And so in contrast to the laborer who sleeps sweetly regardless of what is brought in, the rich man's anxiety about what he does not have keeps him from being able to live a life of contentment because he or she will always be discontent over what they don't have. John D. Rockefeller was an American philanthropist, and he was one of the richest Americans in history and one of the richest people in modern history. There's two quotes that are attributed to him with that I want to share. First, it said that someone asked him, how much money is enough? His response? Just a little bit more. Now, we all may not be that candid if somebody asks us that, but can we be candid with ourselves? Is this not the mentality that we are trained to believe in our society? I just need that next thing, that next thing. Second, after John D. Rockefeller died, it said that someone went to his accountant and said, how much money did he leave behind? How much did he leave when he died? And his accountant aptly responded, all of it. Spending your life pursuing the accumulation of wealth and material gain is futile because the grave tells us that we leave it all when we die. Verse 15, as he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. So the internal delusion of greed is that it leads to discontentment and not the satisfaction that it promises. Because if our heart believes that all we need is a little bit more, then our heart's always going to be set on what we don't have. Now hear me, there's nothing wrong with a big paycheck. There is nothing wrong with material things. There's nothing wrong with investing for retirement, and there's nothing wrong with that promotion you hope for. But there is a clear danger that comes with wealth. As Jesus made clear when he warned us that it was harder for a rich man to get into the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Paul Tripp, in his book Redeeming Money, says, the supposed self-reliance of wealth can tempt us to believe in the larger delusion of our autonomy, that we have a right to live life as we want, and of our self-sufficiency, that we have it within ourselves all that we need to do it. Money can allow us to afford a self-centered way of living that acts if nothing is greater than us and more important than our individual wants, needs, and feelings. Do you see the delusion that can come with greed and the oppression towards others that can come with a love of money? And do you see how a love for wealth can lead us to believe that we don't need God because we can provide for ourselves all that we need? So, how do we fight this oppressive and delusional trap of greed? Should we all become monks? Should we just give everything away? No. In verses 18 to 20, we see the upward wisdom of contentment. The author of Ecclesiastes says, behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him. For this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil. This is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. And so if the internal delusion of greed is that it leads to discontentment and not satisfaction, the wisdom needed to combat this is to enjoy what we have right now in moment by moment contentment by having a heart that trusts in the sovereignty of God and accepts the lot that we have been given. So what's wise? That we eat and drink and find enjoyment in your life. But we can only do this, hear me, we can only do this and enjoy the things of this life when we understand them to be momentary gifts and not the meaning of life. If we pursue the gifts of creation as the purpose of creation, then we pursue a vain end that leads to oppression and delusion and destruction. But when we recognize that the things of this world are not what we were ultimately made for, then we can welcome food and drink and wealth and honor as God gives it as momentary pleasures that are meant to take our hearts back to God in gratitude and to others in generosity. Now, this can be easy to hear if we come from means. But there are some people in this room who feel like they do not have all that they truly need. So how does one, as verse 19 says, accept his lot and rejoice in his toil and see that the life we have right now is a gift of God? Well, this is where the author of Ecclesiastes is calling us to seriously consider the meaning of life. Because here's the sharp, but I hope refreshing message of the Bible. God is not ultimately concerned with your personal comfort. He's ultimately concerned with your deepest and eternal joy. This doesn't mean that he isn't concerned with your temporal needs, but that he's going to filter your finite needs in light of your eternal needs. And the message of the Bible is built on the belief that God created all things and is the source of all life, which then implies that God has given meaning to existence, a purpose to creation, an end for which we were made, in which we will find our greatest degree of joy, contentment, and flourishing when we are living in the purpose that God created us for. Therefore, to try and find meaning and significance in creation rather than in the Creator for whom we were made will leave us wanting. Or as one Christian philosopher said, if you go against the grain of the universe, you get splinters. If God created all things to have a purpose, then when we live outside of that purpose and try and make a meaning for ourselves outside of his, in opposition to his, we're gonna get splinters and we're gonna experience deep soul pain because it's not what we were made for. But if we correct our understanding of the meaning of life to align with God's purposes for creation, then we will, verse 20, not much remember the days of our life because God keeps us occupied with joy in our heart. This is not a wiping of our memory. This is a memory that filters all of the pain and suffering of this life through the God-given joy that he places in our hearts. What a worldview. Do you want that kind of joy that can sustain you through suffering? Because whereas living in oppositions to God's purposes might bring temporary pleasure, it's going to bring lasting pain and discontentment, which is why in the moment, on the surface, people can seem okay, but then at the flip of a hat, they can turn around and tell you that they feel miserable. Whereas living in God's purposes may bring temporary pain and discomfort at times, but it will bring lasting and eternal pleasure that will sustain you in the midst of that pain. And here, when we live in God's purposes, is how we as the church can truly experience surface pain, but have deep, unshakable joy. This is what enabled the martyrs to sing hymns as they were being burned alive. And this is the joy that Christ set before him that was the fuel that sustained him to go through the suffering of the cross for your sake and for mine. So, what is God's purpose for you and I that enables us to be gratefully content regardless of our circumstances or the amount of our material possessions? Well, before we get to that, I want to talk about the message that we are all fed about the purpose of our life and the danger that comes with it. The American dream. Make a name for yourself, be personally autonomous, have sex, acquire wealth, fall in love, work harder, raise a family. Pain is bad, so stay comfortable, make your own meaning and live into it. Be who you want to be. Again, some of these things are good. But the problem is that if we believe that this is the meaning of life, then when we do not have any one of these things, we will believe that we are failing, that we are less valuable than those who do have them, and that we need more than what we actually have right now in the moment. Your standard of the good life will measure goodness based off what you believe you need for your greatest good, and that will be your meaning for life. But if we all can make our own meaning for life, then there is no true meaning. And so if we take this individualized, consumer-driven, materialistic, hypersexualized, American-made meaning for life, and we place it over our current circumstances, and here's the scary part, over our Christian faith, then we will not be able to accept our lot and rejoice in our toil and see that the life we have right now is a gift from God if we're missing any one of those things. Because if we believe the good life is measured in money, sex, power, and comfort, then we will think that we do not have what we need if we don't have our personally subjective measure of those things. And in fact, here's the scary part. If we put this filter over our Christian faith, then we will believe that God is failing us for not giving us that job, that relationship, that raise, that house, fill in the blank of whatever it is that you believe you need in order to be content. And the author of Ecclesiastes is crying out to our modern world saying, something that does not last cannot contain anything lasting. Something that does not last cannot possess anything lasting. So what does God want for you? He wants you to enjoy him. Psalm 16:11. You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. He wants you and I to drink from his living water and never be thirsty again. You say, but Brad, I have real needs. Yes, I know. Matthew 6:25-34. He knows your needs and he values you above all of creation. Okay, Brad, so then why is he not meeting them? Short answer, I don't know. Long answer, well, he may not be meeting your needs in the way that you think he should meet them, but if God is truly God, then can we trust him that he is meeting our deepest needs in the ways that he knows we need them? Can we trust in his perfect wisdom that amongst any trial, suffering, or physical need that we have, he may use that to grow our trust in him so that our hearts might love him more than the things of this world? That if he has not removed the trial from us, can we trust that his good, wise, fatherly, loving heart that is for you is driving the staying of his hand? Because he wants to grow in you an awareness of your need for him over and above your perceived need of the material things that you think you need. That if the purpose of life is to glorify God and enjoy him forever, rather than acquire more wealth and personal comfort, then should we not expect him to work in such a way that he will remove our dependency off of the things of this world to grow in us a deeper, more lasting, more joyful dependency upon him? Can we as a church believe that he can use unmet, chronic, physical needs as a means to grow our enjoyment of him? So here's the tension that our heart should be feeling. Is God enough? Is he enough? Because when we see his value, his worth, and the abundance of the riches that are ours in him, then we can be content right now, regardless of what we have or what we think we need. And what a tragedy life would be if we chose to live for something that would never deliver what we hoped it would and miss the true meaning of life. And this tragedy is exactly what the author of Ecclesiastes presents to us in chapter 6. Look at verse 3. He says, if a man fathers 100 children and lives many years so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For it comes in vanity and goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to the one place? Remember, Ecclesiastes is a book of poetry, meaning what he states, he's trying to engage the emotions of your heart to consider the way that you think about reality. So long life and multiple children, multiple generations of children was the greatest blessing that an ancient Israelite could hope for from God. And so here is this theoretical man who lives for thousands of years and has hundreds of children, a hyperbolic situation, and yet his heart is not satisfied with life's good things, and he exercises discontentment over what he doesn't have and meets a bitter end. He has no burial. The author of Ecclesiastes says that a stillborn child is better than him. Now hear me. The author of Ecclesiastes is not trying to tell you that a stillborn child is a good thing. It is a tragedy. And that's what makes this comparison so heavy. Again, he is not saying that a stillborn child is a good thing. He's trying to cut through the delusion of acquiring wealth as the end for one's life by utilizing a very acute tragedy to stir up emotions in our heart. He knows that a stillborn child is tragic, and what he's trying to get us to see is the greater tragedy of being given the gift of life to waste it, pursuing an end that will never satisfy. He is poetically trying to use the stark reality of death to wake us up, to live our lives with wisdom and in pursuit of the meaning that God has for us. The author of Ecclesiastes is like a jeweler. He's pulling the black felt behind the diamond so that we can see the beauty of the diamond rather than the darkness of the felt. And so he calls to mind death as the black felt so that we might see the beauty and meaning that is in life, to see the light that is being refracted off all the different facets rather than focusing on the black felt of death. Do you see that? So here we sit. Ecclesiastes is trying to get us to see that there is meaning in life, but he uses death to show that the meaning must be found outside of the natural world, which tells us that we can only enjoy our life now when we see the things of this world as momentary gifts and not the end for which we were made. Chapter 6, verse 7 through 9. All the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage has the wise man over the fool? And what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. So what advantage does the poor man who knows how to conduct himself have over the rich man? He's content with what his eyes see, rather than being led into the wilderness and the wasteland by his greed into the wandering of his appetite. Again, what are you living for? Because wouldn't it be a tragedy if at the end of your life you looked back and said, what was it all for? And if we live for the American dream, we will always want more. We will never be content. And we will actually question God's love for us if he doesn't give us the things that we think we need. But remember, God is for your deepest joy. And you will not find this God-given joy by seeking and living for the things of this world. Instead, our heart has to be set in him and be grateful for what we've been given, to rejoice in what he's doing in our hearts now. So what is the end of the pursuit of your joy? What are you pursuing? What are you living for? One of these two options will leave us wanting, and the other will leave us content. How do we know if we're living for God or the things of this world? I'm going to utilize Tim Keller again. He's really helpful here. He says, what is your real, daily, functional salvation? What are you really living for? What is your real, not your professed God? A good way to discern this is how you respond to unanswered prayers and frustrated hopes. If you ask for something that you don't get, you may become sad and disappointed. Then you go on. Hey, life's not over. Those are not your functional masters. But when you pray and work for something and you don't get it, and you respond with explosive anger or deep despair, then you may have found your real God. What are you living for? What's your hope set in? Where do you find your joy? How do you respond to unanswered prayers? If God doesn't answer the prayers in the ways that you think he should answer them, does that bring up anger and despair? Or is that an opportunity to trust in his wise, fatherly, loving heart for you? Because you know he is for you and has your deepest needs in mind. Because if our hearts are set to find joy in God, then we can, like Paul says in Philippians 4, I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Or Hebrews 13:5, keep your life free from love of money and be content with what you have, for he, Jesus, has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Either an awareness of the presence of God in your life will keep you from a love of money, or a love of money in your life will keep you from the joy of God's presence. Matthew 6:24, no one can serve two masters, for he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. So will we pursue seeking him, more of him who promises to satisfy, who always has more to give, who will more abundantly and lavishly show you his faithfulness and his steadfast love for you that will go beyond the grave and satisfy you for all eternity? Or will we pursue material things, wealth, honor, money, that always promises to satisfy, but actually leaves us discontent and wanting? This also is vanity and striving after the wind. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word. We thank you that you are not afraid to wake us up to the potential temptation and danger of greed. Thank you that your word is like a double-edged sword, Lord, that cuts deeper than what we think sometimes, Lord, we need. But God, we thank you that we can trust your good fatherly heart that is for us. Lord, I pray for everyone in this room, including myself, that you would free us from a love of money. As we live in a society that pushes us to want more and more and more, to work harder, to make more money, to have a bigger income, Lord, I pray that you would satisfy our hearts with Christ so that we might say like the psalmist, because your steadfast love is better than life, my lips will praise you. Would we see that your steadfast love is better than life? And would you free us, Lord, from the oppression and the delusion that comes with greed? And instead, would you free us to glorify you with our lives and to be generous with our money towards others, seeing that you might meet the needs of others through the giving away of our money. God, do a good work in my heart and in the heart of everyone in this church so that we might be a people known as those who have a heart for God and not a heart for money. Thank you for your word, Lord, and all that it teaches. Give us eyes to see your glory and your beauty more every day. We pray this all in your son's name. Amen.